I was cataloging Soviet municipal records in Almaty when I noticed something strange. A statue stood in the city center from 1887 to 1934. Bronze figure holding navigational instruments. Original dedication, monument to Artyom Volkov, master navigator. Then I found the second file. Same statue, 1921. The name had changed. Monument to Revolutionary Navigation. Not a new statue, same one, same pedestal, same bronze, same instruments, just a new name, different person, different era, different story. I pulled records from 6 other Central Asian cities. The pattern repeated. Statues erected in the 1870s and 1880s with specific names. Then, between 1918 and 1935, those same statues acquired new identities, new plaques, new histories. Same bronze faces watching the same squares, commemorating entirely different people from entirely different centuries. I should have assumed bureaucratic reorganization, Soviet revisionism, standard historical cleanup. I didn't. Here's what made it impossible to dismiss. The original names from the 1880s don't appear anywhere else in historical records. No birth certificates, no death records, no biographical documentation, no newspaper mentions. These weren't minor figures whose records got lost. These were people important enough for expensive public monuments, ceremony dedications attended by thousands, yet they left no documentary trace, just statues and plaques. Stranger still, the replacement names don't check out either. When you trace the new Soviet identities, they connect to real documented figures, but those figures died decades before the monument technology depicted became available, or lived hundreds of miles away, or worked in professions completely unrelated to what the statue shows. Both sets of names are wrong. The original names don't exist. The replacement names don't match, but the statues remain. Bronze figures depicting specific people with specific tools from specific periods, watching city squares with faces that once had real names we'll never recover. The geographic pattern is too precise for coincidence. I've documented 47 statues across what old maps labeled Tartarian territories, modern Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, parts of Russia, and Kyrgyzstan. Every one erected between 1873 and 1894. Every one renamed between 1918 and 1936. Not scattered across the Soviet period, concentrated in 18 years. The original names, when you map where monuments stood, cluster around cities 19th century maps identified as major Tartarian centers. Trading cities, later histories downgraded to backwaters. University towns, post-revision encyclopedias claimed had no significant institutions until Russian establishment. Port cities on rivers, subsequent cartography showed as barely navigable. The statues marked something, specific people accomplishing specific things in specific places. Then the names got swapped. I found the renaming guidelines, a 1923 memo from Soviet cultural authorities on historical monument reconciliation. The language is careful, bureaucratic. Monuments commemorating individuals whose biographical details cannot be verified through approved historical sources should be reattributed to documented revolutionary or pre-revolutionary figures whose contributions align with the monument's symbolic representation. Cannot be verified through approved sources, not cannot be verified, period. They're admitting the original people might have existed, might have done what monuments claimed, but their existence contradicts approved history. Solution? Find someone else whose life can be verified through new official records and claim the statue depicts them instead. If no suitable figure exists, rededicate as symbolic representation of revolutionary ideals. Abstract the person away entirely if needed. The professions matter. navigators with celestial observation instruments, cartographers with mapping tools, architects with drafting equipment, engineers with mechanical devices, physicians with medical instruments, not generic symbolic figures, technical specialists whose work produces verifiable results, buildings that stand or don't, maps that chart terrain or don't, infrastructure that functions or don't. Someone in the 1880s thought these achievements important enough for permanent bronze. Someone in the 1920s thought those attributions dangerous enough to systematically erase and replace. Specific example: statue in Shymkent, Kazakhstan, erected 1889. Original, in honor of Dmitry Karzov, master cartographer, for maps that guide our prosperity. Shows a man holding charts and compass, dressed in late 18th century clothing based on carved details. In 1924, new plaque, Monument to Semyon Chernyshev, revolutionary cartographer and hero of the people. I researched Chernyshev. He existed. Minor 1905 workers' movement figure, died in 1907 in a factory accident in Yekaterinburg, over 2,000 kilometers away. No connection to Shymkent, no evidence he worked as a cartographer, no maps attributed to him. But he's documented, verifiable, fits approved narrative. Close enough. Dmitry Karzov? No record exists anywhere except that 1889 plaque, but the statue remains. A man in 1780s dress holding cartographic instruments, now officially commemorating someone who died in 1907 in a factory. The disconnect is total. What I haven't found: contemporary objections. When renamings happened in the 1920s and 30s, no public outcry, no newspaper editorials, no local historians protesting. Either perfect compliance or the generation that knew who these monuments depicted was gone or silenced. I found one letter, 1928, from a Tashkent Cultural Committee member to regional authorities. Brief, careful. Respectfully request clarification regarding monument to Volkov. Local elderly express confusion about the dedication change, recalling family stories about the original ceremony. Request guidance on appropriate public messaging. The response, if any, isn't in the file. The statue's name changed anyway. One careful bureaucratic inquiry, then silence. The timing correlates with map revisions. Between 1918 and 1936, as statues were being renamed, official cartography underwent massive revision. Old Tartaria-associated place names removed. Cities' 19th century atlases labeled Tartarian centers reclassified to minor towns. Major trade routes downgraded to local paths. Map geophysics renamed. Old maps showed extensive, developed, interconnected region. New maps showed fragmented territories with no unified history, no significant development, no achievements. And during this cartographic revision, statues commemorating technical specialists in those territories quietly acquired new names. The people who built the cities, mapped routes, designed architecture, became officially unverifiable. Their monuments got reassigned to people who fit the new maps. What these statues actually depict contradicts both naming schemes. The navigator in Almaty holds an astrolabe with additional calibration rings experts can't identify. The architect in Bishkek displays building plans carved into the pedestal, showing construction techniques official histories say weren't introduced until decades after the 1886 creation. Not generic symbolic representations, specific technical details carved by sculptors working from real models, real instruments, real knowledge. Then those specifics got renamed to commemorate people who never held those tools, never practiced those techniques, never existed in those time periods. The bronze remains accurate. The names became fiction. There's a pattern in renaming names. When Soviet authorities couldn't find suitable revolutionary figures, they chose names from approved pre-revolutionary Russian history.
Scientists, engineers, physicians from Moscow or St. Petersburg, whose documented achievements could be celebrated without contradicting the new narrative. These figures really existed, really accomplished things, just nowhere near these cities. A Samarkand statue originally honoring a local architect got renamed to commemorate a Moscow engineer who died 40 years before the statue was created and never traveled further east than the Urals. The physical impossibility didn't matter. What mattered was providing a verifiable name that wouldn't raise questions about local achievement, local knowledge, local civilization the new maps insisted never existed.
If these were simply Soviet ideological revisions, why keep the statues? The Soviet Union demolished thousands of politically problematic monuments. Tsarist generals, aristocrats, religious figures, all removed during this period. If original dedications were ideologically unsuitable, destruction was standard. But these survived. Not just survived, but carefully renamed, replaqued, integrated into new historical narrative. That suggests the monuments themselves were too significant to remove, too visible to destroy, too expensive to replace. The bronze had to stay, only the names could change. Which raises the question, what made these particular monuments untouchable when so many others were demolished without hesitation? I found evidence of careful planning. A 1922 Tashkent document shows lists of monuments scheduled for historical reconciliation, with proposed new attributions drafted months in advance. Committees reviewed each statue, researched replacement names, drafted new dedication text, formal approval processes, multiple bureaucratic sign-offs. Monuments marked for destruction just got demolition orders. These renaming projects received attention reserved for new monument construction. Someone high in Soviet cultural authority considered these statues worth preserving, worth extensive bureaucratic effort creating new historical narratives. Why? What made a navigator statue in Almaty worth that investment when Tsarist military monuments were being blown up? The architectural evidence supports original time periods, not replacements. Buildings in these cities from the 1820s to 1840s show construction techniques, materials, and structural engineering official histories claim weren't introduced until Russian imperial expansion in the 1870s to 1880s. Not minor stylistic influences, fundamental building methodologies, load-bearing innovations, architectural mathematics. These buildings exist in the same cities where statues to master architects were erected in the 1880s, then renamed in the 1920s. The monuments weren't honoring abstract ideals or Russian achievements. They credited people who actually designed and built these structures, people whose existence became inconvenient when the new narrative needed the region primitive before Russian arrival. Rename the architects, reassign the credit, and within one generation, buildings become mysterious anomalies or get attributed to foreign influence. In demolition records, I discovered something else. While these statues survived renaming, related monuments that were too specific didn't survive at all. In cities where the main civic monument got renamed and preserved, smaller commemorative plaques on actual buildings they designed disappeared entirely. Removed, destroyed, no replacements. The prominent monuments got new names. Specific building attributions got erased completely. A statue in a square could be reassigned to anyone. A plaque on a building saying "Designed by Dmitry Karzov, 1834" is harder to reconcile when official history insists nobody named Karzov existed and the building wasn't supposedly constructed until 1870. Solution: remove specific attributions, keep the statue but change its meaning. Selective preservation of memory. Vague enough to survive, specific enough to eventually forget. Here's what the Soviet records reveal about verification attempts. In several cases, authorities genuinely tried to research the original names before reassigning the monuments. Archives show inquiries sent to regional historical societies, requests for documentation about the people listed on 1880s dedication plaques. The responses are telling. No records found. Individual cannot be verified through available sources. Documentation may have been lost during administrative restructuring. These weren't responses claiming the people never existed. These were responses saying the records don't exist anymore, or never existed in the approved archives, or existed somewhere that authorities either couldn't or wouldn't access. The absence of documentation became evidence of non-existence, which justified renaming. But absence of records in officially approved archives isn't the same as absence of existence. It just means someone didn't document them in ways the new bureaucracy recognized, or the documentation got removed, or destroyed, or hidden. The replacement process reveals ideology at work. When you analyze the new names chosen for these statues, they serve specific narrative purposes. Revolutionary heroes when possible to connect the monuments to Soviet legitimacy, Russian scientists and engineers when revolutionary figures weren't available, to attribute regional technical achievement to approved external sources. Never local figures whose existence might suggest the region had its own advanced civilization, its own technical traditions, its own architectural and scientific developments. The renaming wasn't random, it was strategic historical revision. Every new attribution reinforced the message: anything advanced in this region came from elsewhere, was built by others, arrived through Russian expansion or Soviet revolution. The monuments to local achievement got transformed into monuments to external influence. I think about the sculptors who created these works. They weren't creating symbolic representations. They carved specific faces, specific clothing, specific instruments. Someone modeled for these statues. Someone showed the sculptor the navigational tools, the architectural plans, the medical instruments. Someone verified the accuracy of technical details. The original monument committees didn't commission abstract allegories. They commissioned portraits, specific people important enough to their communities to justify expensive bronze casting, public ceremonies, permanent placement in city centers. Then those specific people became unverifiable. Their portraits remain, watching squares where nobody remembers their names, or rather where everyone remembers the wrong names. The renaming dates tell another story. Not all monuments got renamed immediately after the revolution. Some carried their original dedications through the early 1920s. Then, between 1928 and 1936, concentrated burst of renaming activity. What changed in 1928? That's when Stalin's first five-year plan began, when central control over historical narrative intensified, when the last generation with living memory of pre-revolutionary Central Asia was dying or being silenced. The monuments survived the initial revolutionary period because they weren't obviously czarist or reactionary, but as central control tightened and the approved historical narrative solidified, the original names became problems. Not problems significant enough to justify destruction, just problems requiring correction. New names, new stories, new official reality. I've walked through these cities, stood in front of these monuments. Most locals don't know about the name changes. Why would they? The current plaques look old, official, permanent. Tourist brochures reference the Soviet-era names. Local histories cite the replacement attributions. Only in archives do the original dedications survive, filed away in municipal records that researchers rarely access. The physical monuments remain visible, central, impossible to miss. The historical truth remains buried in documents nobody reads. It's perfect preservation of forgetting. The evidence exists, technically available, just effectively invisible. Ask about the statue in the square, and locals will tell you it honors whoever the current plaque says it does. The original names exist only in archived files, known only to researchers like me who cross-reference municipal records across multiple decades. And even then, we can't verify those original names existed because all other documentation of their existence was either destroyed or never entered the approved historical record. There's a specific type of sadness in looking at these monuments knowing what they represent. Not just historical revision, though that's part of it, but erasure of achievement. These were people whose communities honored them, whose contributions were significant enough to warrant permanent bronze commemoration, whose technical knowledge, architectural skill, navigational expertise, medical advancement, cartographic precision mattered enough for cities to invest considerable resources in monuments.
Then those specific people became unverifiable. Their portraits remain, watching squares where nobody remembers their names, or rather where everyone remembers the wrong names. I don't know who these people really were. The original names might have been real, might have been ceremonial titles, might have been something else entirely. I don't know what they built, what they mapped, what they navigated. Much of that physical evidence was successfully attributed elsewhere or downgraded to irrelevance. I don't know why the Soviet authorities thought renaming was better than destruction, though I can guess it involved preserving valuable public art while erasing inconvenient history. What I know is dozens of monuments across former Tartarian territories commemorating technical specialists got systematically renamed in a concentrated period coinciding with map revisions that erased Tartarian presence from official cartography. I know the original names can't be verified through approved archives. I know the replacement names don't match the monuments. I know the bronze details depict real instruments, real techniques, real knowledge that contradicts official timelines of regional development. And I know that constitutes evidence of something official history refuses to acknowledge. The statues remain, bronze faces unchanged, watching squares where their names were stolen and replaced, where their achievements were assigned to others, where their very existence became historically impossible. Not destroyed, just renamed. Mission accomplished.